Only the truly brave can make it through these true horror stories. Are you one of them? Prove you're not afraid. Smash that like button, comment below with your biggest fear, and subscribe now, because tonight, the most terrifying tales come to life.
Story 1.
Mysterious bells ring at midnight. My name is Jacob Miller, and I've always been drawn to the forgotten, the places time leaves behind, a passion that grew from exploring abandoned barns and crumbling schoolhouses with my younger brother Tim during lazy Oklahoma summers. Raised in the United States, where crumbling churches and ghost towns dot the landscapes, from the deserts of Nevada to the swamps of Florida, I grew up in a small town near Tulsa, Oklahoma. My father, Henry Miller, a historian with a love for dusty archives, teaching me to listen to the past's whispers through cracked walls and faded photographs. My mother, Clara, a school teacher with a voice like honey, filled our home with stories of pioneers and their struggles, her hymns a soft counterpoint to the creaks of our old house. At 37, with years of documenting abandoned sites for my blog, Forgotten Echoes, which had garnered a modest following from Arizona to Maine, I took on a dare for my online community to spend a night at the abandoned Holy Trinity Church in rural Arkansas, a place locals avoided like a plague. But on September 12, 2025, as I set up my camera at midnight in the bell tower, a deafening bell toll shattered the silence with a force that knocked me to my knees. The sound so violent it rattled my teeth, and a wave of icy air carried the stench of decay and sulfur, brushing my face with unseen hands that left a trail of clammy dread. That moment, at the stroke of midnight on a sweltering night, thick with humidity, plunged me into a nightmare so disturbing, I wish I'd never heard those bells or accepted that dare. Holy Trinity Church stood alone on a weed-choked hill outside Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a sagging wooden structure built in 1885. Its steeple cracked like a broken bone, its windows boarded with warped planks, its bell tower looming like a skeletal finger against the moonlit sky, a silhouette that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The town was a quiet place, its streets lined with faded storefronts and homes with peeling paint, the air thick with the hum of cicadas, the distant howl of a coyote, and the faint tang of river mud from the nearby Arkansas River. Locals spoke of the church in hushed tones, their eyes darting away, claiming it was abandoned after a fire in 1902 killed the entire congregation, 32 souls, though no official records explained the cause. And the bells, they said, still rang at midnight. Old Man Carter, the grizzled gas station owner who gave me directions, gripped my arm with a strength that belied his age, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "Don't go there at midnight," he rasped, his breath smelling of tobacco and fear. "The bells call the dead, and they don't let go." I laughed it off. Small towns in the United States love their ghost stories, tales of haunted plantations in the South, cursed crossroads in the Midwest, and spectral miners in the West. But his warning echoed in my mind as I parked my truck. The church's silhouette sending a shiver down my spine, its silence heavier than the humid night air. My first night, I entered through a broken window, the jagged glass scraping my jacket, a floor creaking under my boots with a sound like groaning bones, the air heavy with the smell of mold, ash from the old fire, and something rotten, like meat left too long in the sun, a stench that clung to my throat. The pews were charred, their wood blackened and splintered, the altar a blackened ruin with a melted cross, and the bell tower rose above, its rope dangling like a noose, swaying slightly despite the stillness. At midnight, restless and filming for my blog, to prove my courage, I climbed the rickety stairs, my flashlight beam trembling as it caught cobwebs thick as curtains, rat droppings scattered like dark confetti, and the faint outline of scratches on the walls. Names perhaps, or pleas. As I adjusted my camera on a tripod, a deafening bell toll shattered the silence with a force that knocked me to my knees, the vibrations rattling my teeth. The sound a deep, resonant clang that seemed to come from inside my skull. The air turned icy, my breath fogging despite the summer heat, and a wave of stench, decay and sulfur, sharp and acrid, hit me, making my eyes water. Unseen hands brushed my face, their touch clammy and cold like wet grave soil, leaving a trail of goosebumps and a faint scratch on my cheek that I felt but couldn't see. I scrambled down, locking myself in my truck, my heart pounding against my ribs. The tolls echoing in my head like a drumbeat of doom, a rhythm that wouldn't fade. The next morning, I found scratches on my cheek, faint but real, red lines that stung when I touched them, and the footage showed the bell swinging wildly, though no wind stirred, the rope coiling as if alive. The following day, shaken but driven by a need to understand, I researched the church's history, sifting through charred remnants in the ruins, and finding a leather-bound ledger from Father Amos, the priest in 1902, its pages yellowed and stained with what looked like soot or blood. He described a schism within the congregation, half led by a zealot named Ruth Harrow, a widow with a voice like thunder, believed the end was near, conducting a ritual to summon a divine judge with the bell's tolls, claiming it would separate the righteous from the damned. On October 31st, 1902, a fire broke out during the rite, a blaze that consumed the church, killing all 32, Ruth, her followers and the dissenters, their bodies found fused to the pews, their mouths open in silent screams, their hands clawing at the air. Amos wrote of hearing tolls long after, seeing shadows ascend the stairs, and sealing the bell with a prayer and a silver nail driven into its clapper, but he confessed the ritual's failure left it active, a beacon for the damned. A separate note listed their names: Ruth, Elias, Mary, Samuel, each marked with judged or condemned, their sins ranging from greed to betrayal. That night, I returned with a recorder and a motion sensor camera, my curiosity afire in my chest, despite the fear gnawing at my gut. At midnight, the tolls came again, 13 strikes that rattled the windows, followed by whispers, names, cries, a guttural chant that sounded like a funeral dirge. The audio captured a shadow climbing the stairs, its form humanoid but distorted, its limbs too long, its head tilting unnaturally, the bell ringing without cause, the rope swaying as if pulled by invisible hands. Over the next week, the hauntings escalated into a relentless siege. The tolls rang daily at midnight, each strike accompanied by a cold gust that chilled my bones. The stench of decay and sulfur so thick it made my eyes water and my stomach churn. The air heavy with a metallic tang like old blood. Footsteps thudded above, heavy and uneven, circling the tower, and I saw faces in the charred wood. Ruth's stern glare, a child's tear-streaked cheeks, a man with a burned scalp, shifting with the moonlight, their eyes following my every move. One night, as I documented with my camera, the bell rope moved, coiling like a snake, its fibers creaking, and a whisper hissed my name. "Jacob, join us." Its voice a rasp that sent shivers down my spine. My mind warred with itself. Fear screamed to flee, to abandon this cursed place and never look back. But curiosity, that stubborn thread of my soul, urged me to stay, to uncover the truth, to prove my worth to my blog's followers. I confided in Father Daniel, a retired priest in Little Rock, via a shaky phone call at dawn, his voice crackling with age. "It's a soul trap," he said, his words heavy with dread. "Ruth's ritual bound them, and the bell calls more with each toll. You must silence it, but it will fight back." He sent an old rite, salt, holy water, and a hammer to break the clapper, warning me of the risk. His silence after hanging up, a weight on my conscience. On September 19th, alone and driven by a need to end this, I climbed the tower at midnight, the air thick with dread, the humidity clinging to my skin like a second shirt. I sprinkled salt around the bell, its grains crunching under my boots, as I chanted the Latin phrases from the rite, my voice trembling, my hands slick with sweat, my heart a drum in my chest. The tolls grew louder, each strike a hammer blow to my skull, the shadows descending, Ruth in a scorched dress, her face a mask of fury, the child with hollow eyes, others with burned flesh peeling from their bones. Their hands reached, cold and insistent. their touch like ice water on my skin, and Ruth's voice boomed, "You've run for us, now stay." A tendril of shadow wrapped my leg, pulling me toward the bell, my fear spiking, run or fight, my mind a battlefield of panic and resolve. I swung the hammer, the clapper cracking with a sound like a gunshot, the bell groaning, its metal glowing red. I broke free, the rope lashing out, grazing my arm, and fled as the tower shook, the tolls fading into a wail that chased me down the stairs, my breath ragged, my legs weak. On September 26th, desperate and running out of time, I gathered a team: Father Daniel, despite his frail legs and trembling hands; Ellen, a local historian with a steady gaze and a satchel of notes; and Paul, a burly ex-firefighter with a sledgehammer he wielded like a warrior, his face set with determination. We set up at midnight, candles flickering in the damp air, their wax dripping like tears, the church's ruins casting jagged shadows. The bell tolled, 13 strikes that shook the walls, the sound of physical force that pressed against my chest, and the shadows emerged, Ruth leading, her eyes blazing with a fire that never died, the child clutching a burned doll, the others following, their forms solid, their wounds gaping. "You can't silence judgment," Ruth roared, her voice a thunderclap, the pews rattling, the floor trembling as if the earth itself recoiled. The shadows lunged, pinning Ellen to the wall, her screams piercing the air as her notes scattered like autumn leaves, Paul swinging the sledgehammer with a grunt, shattering the clapper with a shower of sparks that lit the tower. I doused the bell with holy water, the liquid sizzling on the metal, steam rising in a hiss, and Father Daniel chanted the rite, his voice frail but resolute, his cross trembling in his grip. The bell cracked, the tower trembling, its stones splitting with a groan, the shadows wailing, their forms dissolving into a thick, acrid mist that stung my eyes and throat. But Paul vanished, his sledgehammer clattering to the floor, his shadow lingering for a moment, merging with the mist, his absence a silent accusation that pierced my heart. The aftermath was a hollow victory, a scar on my soul that wouldn't heal. Paul was gone, his family searching the hill and the surrounding woods in vain, his wife collapsing in grief, his children left with questions I couldn't answer. And Ellen quit her work, her hands trembling as she packed her notes, her mind fractured by the sight of those shadows. The tower was sealed with concrete poured by a reluctant crew. The church left to rot, its doors boarded, the hill marked by yellow tape that flapped in the wind like a mourner's flag. Father Daniel aged overnight, his health failing, his rosary worn to threads, and the village of Pine Bluff grew quieter, its people avoiding the church, whispering of midnight bells that claimed the curious, their voices tinged with a fear I understood too well. I moved to a new site in Missouri, taking a job documenting an old mill, seeking peace in the rustle of leaves and the flow of the river. But the tolls haunt me, a phantom chime that wakes me at midnight, my heart pounding, my sheets damp with sweat. The United States is a land of history and restless spirits, its abandoned places holding echoes of the damned, and I'd stirred ones that refused to rest. The lesson seared into my soul. Some bells call more than time. They call the damned, and tampering with them can ring for your soul, binding you to their judgment. Now, every night at midnight, I hear those 13 tolls, feel that cold touch on my face, see a shadow climbing my stairs, its footsteps heavy, a reminder that Ruth and her flock may still summon me, their portal reopened by my reckless curiosity.
Story 2.
My name is Clara Jennings, and I've always been fascinated by the stories etched into old buildings. A curiosity that began with my grandmother's tales of haunted farmhouses. Raised in the United States, where historic chapels and forgotten settlements speckle the countryside, from the rolling plains of Nebraska to the misty hills of Vermont, I grew up in a small town near Omaha. My father a carpenter who taught me to read the grain of wood, my mother a librarian who fed me legends of the frontier. At 35, with years of experience as a historical preservationist, I took a contract to restore the abandoned St. Agnes Chapel in rural Kentucky, a job I saw as a chance to connect with the past. But on October 7th, 2025, as I tapped a wall to check for rot, a piercing scream erupted from the plaster, the wall trembling, and a wave of heat and the stench of burning flesh hit me, leaving my hands blistered. That moment, at 10:43 p.m. on a crisp autumn night, dragged me into a horror so unsettling, I wish I'd never touched those walls. St. Agnes Chapel, perched on a wooded ridge outside Lexington, Kentucky, a weathered stone building erected in 1795, its walls cracked, its roof sagging, its stained glass windows shattered, leaving only jagged edges that glinted like teeth. The surrounding town was a sleepy hamlet, its streets quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl, the air carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Locals avoided the chapel, whispering of disappearances and strange noises, and Mrs. Hattie, the postmistress with a face like crumpled paper, grabbed my arm as I left the store. "Don't go near them walls after dark," she croaked, her breath sour with mint. "They hold spirits that don't rest." I chuckled. Small towns in the United States are rich with ghost stories, from spectral soldiers in Gettysburg to wailing widows in the Appalachians. But her warning lodged in my mind as I unpacked my tools, the chapel's silence pressing against me like a weight. My first night, I worked late. The chapel's interior dim, the air thick with the smell of mildew, old stone, and a faint metallic tang, like rusted iron or dried blood. The walls were pocked with age, their plaster peeling, and I tapped one with a mallet to check for rot, the sound hollow. At 10:43 p.m., a piercing scream erupted from the plaster, a sound so raw it clawed at my eardrums, the wall trembling as if alive, dust raining down. A wave of heat washed over me, searing my skin, and the stench of burning flesh, acrid, sickly sweet, filled my nostrils, leaving my hands blistered where I'd touched the stone. I stumbled back, dropping my tools, my heart hammering, and the scream faded into a whisper, "Help us," echoing through the empty pews. Mrs. Hattie found me at dawn. My face pale, my hands raw. "I warned you," she said, her voice trembling. "The walls hold the burned." That night I couldn't sleep, the scream replaying, my dreams filled with faces pressed against the plaster, their mouths open in silent agony. The next day I researched the chapel's past, finding a brittle journal from Father Daniel, the priest in 1798, hidden in a loose floorboard. He described a settler named Abigail Crane, accused of witchcraft during a harsh winter, who was burned alive with her family, 6 souls, against the chapel's north wall, their deaths blamed on a purifying fire by a zealous mob. Daniel wrote of hearing screams after, seeing their shadows in the plaster, and sealing the wall with prayers, but the ritual failed, leaving their spirits trapped. Church records noted odd events, walls cracking, voices at night, leading to the chapel's abandonment in 1830. That night I set up a recorder, and at 10:43 p.m. the scream returned, followed by whispers, names, pleas, a low chant. The audio captured the wall bulging, faces forming in the plaster, their eyes hollow before the device shorted out. Over the next week, the hauntings intensified. The walls screamed nightly at 10:43 p.m., each cry accompanied by a blast of heat that singed my clothes and the stench of burning flesh that made me gag. The air thick with ash that coated my throat. Footsteps scraped within the walls, uneven and desperate, and I saw hands pressing against the plaster, their fingers blackened, their nails broken. One night, as I measured a crack, the wall pulsed, a hand breaking through, its touch cold yet burning, leaving a welt on my arm. My mind battled. Fear urged me to flee, to leave this cursed place. But duty, my preservationist's creed, pushed me to stay, to free these souls. I called Father Thomas, a retired priest in Louisville, who rasped, "They're bound by hate. Break the seal, but beware their wrath." He sent a rite, salt, holy water, and a chisel to carve a cross, warning of the danger. On October 14th, alone and driven to act, I faced the wall at 10:43 p.m., the air cracking with tension. I sprinkled salt along the base, its grains hissing on the stone as I chanted the Latin prayer, my voice shaky, my hands trembling. The scream grew deafening, the wall bulging, the spirits emerging, Abigail with scorched hair, a child with melted skin, others with charred faces. Their hands reached, cold yet searing, and Abigail's voice hissed, "You can't free us." A tendril of shadow wrapped my wrist, pulling me toward the wall, my fear surging, run or fight. But I swung the chisel, carving a cross, the stone cracking. I broke free, fleeing as the wall shuddered, the screams fading into sobs. On October 21st, desperate, I gathered a team. Father Thomas, despite his frailty, Margaret, a historian with a sharp mind, and David, a stonemason with a steady hand. We set up at midnight, candles flickering, the air heavy. The walls screamed, the spirits surging. Abigail leading, her eyes blazing, the others following, their forms solid. "You'll join us," she roared, the pews rattling. The spirits lunged, pinning Margaret, her cries echoing as David chiseled, the stone groaning. I doused the wall with holy water, the liquid sizzling, and Father Thomas prayed, his voice breaking. The wall split, the spirits wailing, but David vanished, his tools clattering, his shadow merging with the dust. The aftermath was a wound on my spirit. David was gone, his family searching in vain, and Margaret quit her work, her hands shaking. The wall was sealed, the chapel abandoned, but the screams linger. I moved to Indiana, but the cries haunt me at 10:43 p.m. The United States is a land of history and restless souls, and I'd stirred ones that refused to rest. The lesson etched into me: some walls hide more than memories, they hide damnation, and tampering with them can trap you in their screams. Now, every night at 10:43 p.m., I hear that cry, feel that heat, a reminder that Abigail may still claim me.
Story 3.
Those who enter never return. My name is Thomas Reed, and I've always chased the thrill of the unknown, a drive that started with sneaking into old warehouses with my cousins as a kid. Raised in the United States, where ruined churches and desolate landscapes stretch from the arid plains of Wyoming to the foggy coasts of Maine. I grew up in a small town near Cheyenne. My father, a park ranger, who taught me to respect nature's secrets. My mother, a storyteller who spun yarns of lost settlers. At 41, with years of experience as an urban explorer and photographer, I accepted a challenge to document the ruined St. Bartholomew Church in rural Idaho, a site whispered about in online forums. But on November 3, 2025, as I stepped inside at dusk, the ground beneath me collapsed. A guttural roar erupted from the earth, and a wave of cold air laced with the stench of rot and blood engulfed me, dragging me into darkness. That moment, at 6:17 p.m. on a chilling evening, thrust me into a terror so profound I wish I'd never crossed that threshold. St. Bartholomew Church loomed on a barren hill outside Boise, Idaho, a crumbling stone ruin built in 1870. Its walls collapsed, its steeple a jagged stump, its interior a maze of broken pews and shattered stained glass that glittered like broken promises under the fading sun. The surrounding area was a desolate stretch of sagebrush and wind-scoured rock, the air carrying the dry scent of dust and the occasional whiff of pine from distant forests. Locals avoided the site, their voices dropping to murmurs when it was mentioned, claiming that those who entered never returned, their disappearances chalked up to accidents or wildlife. Old Man Jenkins, a grizzled rancher at the general store, gripped my shoulder, his fingers trembling. "Turn back," he growled, his breath reeking of whiskey. "That church takes souls, ain't no coming out." I smirked. Small towns in the United States are steeped in eerie legends, from haunted mines in Colorado to cursed cabins in the Ozarks. But his warning lingered as I parked my Jeep, the ruined silhouette casting a shadow that seemed to pulse with menace. My first evening, I ventured inside, the crunch of gravel under my boots giving way to the soft give of decayed wood, the air thick with the smell of mold, damp stone, and a sharp metallic tang, like fresh blood mingled with earth. The interior was a skeletal wreck, pews splintered, the altar a heap of rubble, and a gaping hole in the floor revealed a cavern beneath, its edges jagged. At 6:17 p.m., as I stepped near the hole to photograph, the ground beneath me collapsed with a sickening crunch, dropping me into darkness, a guttural roar erupting from the earth, its vibration shaking my bones. A wave of cold air hit me, biting my skin, laced with the stench of rotten blood, so potent it made my stomach heave, dragging me into a pit where unseen hands clawed at my legs, leaving welts that burned. I scrambled out, my camera smashed, my hands trembling, and the roar faded into a low hum. Stay, echoing in the silence. The next morning I found scratches on my legs, red and inflamed, and the last frame on my backup card showed a shadowy figure in the pit, its eyes glowing. The following day, I researched the church's history, uncovering a faded diary from Father Elias, the priest in 1872, buried under debris. He described a gold rush preacher, Jonah Creed, who led a congregation of prospectors, promising wealth through a ritual to summon a guardian spirit from the earth. On July 14, 1872, the rite went awry, opening a chasm that swallowed Jonah and 12 followers, their screams silenced by a roar, their bodies never recovered. Elias wrote of hearing the hum, seeing shadows rise and sealing the pit with prayers, but the curse lingered, claiming intruders. That night I returned with a recorder, and at 6:17 p.m. the roar returned. Followed by whispers, names, pleas, a deep chant. The audio captured the ground trembling, a hand reaching from the pit, its fingers gnarled, before the device died. Over the next week, the hauntings escalated. The pit roared nightly at 6:17 p.m., each sound accompanied by a cold gust that froze my breath and the stench of rot and blood that coated my tongue, the air thick with dust that scratched my throat. Footsteps echoed from below, heavy and dragging, and I saw faces in the shadows. Jonah's gaunt stare, a miner with a shattered pick, a woman with hollow eyes, shifting with the light. One night, as I probed the edge, a hand burst through, its touch cold yet searing, leaving a burn on my arm. My mind battled. Fear screamed to abandon this cursed place, to save myself. But my explorer's spirit, fueled by the challenge and my blog's audience, pushed me to stay, to confront the unknown. I called Father Paul, a priest in Spokane, who whispered, "It's a soul pit. Break the seal, but they'll fight." He sent a rite, salt, holy water, and a pickaxe to shatter the barrier, warning of the cost. On November 10th, alone and driven to end this, I faced the pit at 6:17 p.m., the air humming with dread. I sprinkled salt around the edge, its grains sizzling on the stone as I chanted the Latin prayer, my voice quaking, my hands sweaty. The roar grew thunderous, the ground splitting, the spirits rising. Jonah in a tattered coat, the miner with a bloody face, others with decayed limbs. Their hands reached, cold yet burning, and Jonah's voice boomed, "You're ours." A tendril of shadow wrapped my ankle, pulling me toward the pit, my fear surging, flee or fight. But I swung the pickaxe, the barrier cracking. I broke free, fleeing as the earth shook, the roar fading into a wail. On November 17th, desperate, I gathered a team. Father Paul, despite his limp, Lisa, a geologist with a steady hand, and Mark, a miner with a crowbar. We set up at dusk, candles guttering, the air tense. The pit roared, the spirits surging, Jonah leading, his eyes glowing, the others following, their forms solid. "No escape," Jonah roared, the pews rattling. The spirits lunged, pinning Lisa, her cries echoing as Mark pried, the stone groaning. I doused the pit with holy water, the liquid hissing, and Father Paul prayed, his voice frail. The barrier shattered, the spirits wailing, but Mark vanished, his crowbar clattering, his shadow sinking into the dark. The aftermath was a void in my soul. Mark was gone, his family searching in vain, and Lisa quit her work, her mind broken. The pit was sealed, the church left to crumble, but the roar lingers. I moved to Oregon, but the hum haunts me at 6:17 p.m. The United States is a land of history and restless spirits, and nights stirred ones that refuse to rest. The lesson carved into me. Some ruins hide more than decay. They hide damnation, and entering them can trap you forever. Now, every night at 6:17 p.m., I hear that roar, feel that cold touch, a reminder that Jonah may still claim me.
Story 4.
Terrifying hymns echo from the forgotten church. My name is Rachel Harper, and I've always been captivated by the power of music, A passion that began with my grandfather's old phonograph, spinning gospel records in our living room. Raised in the United States, where forgotten churches and their haunting melodies linger from the dusty plains of Texas to the rugged mountains of Colorado, I grew up in a small town near Austin. My father, a choir director who taught me harmony, my mother, a seamstress whose quiet hums filled our home. At 33, with years of experience as a musicologist recording oral traditions, I took on a project to capture the sounds of the abandoned Grace Covenant Church in rural Oregon, a site shrouded in mystery. But on December 5th, 2025, as I set up my recorder at midnight, a chilling hymn erupted from the silence, the pews trembling, and a wave of icy air carrying the scent of mildew and decay enveloped me, leaving my skin prickling with unseen touches. That moment, at the stroke of midnight on a frigid winter night, plunged me into a terror so eerie I wish I'd never heard those hymns. Grace Covenant Church stood isolated on a windswept ridge outside Eugene, Oregon, a dilapidated wooden structure built in 1890. Its walls warped, its roof caved in, its steeple a broken silhouette against the starry sky. The surrounding area was a lonely expanse of fir trees and fog, the air thick with the damp scent of moss and the faint rustle of leaves, broken only by the occasional cry of a distant owl. Locals spoke of the church in hushed tones, their faces paling, claiming it was abandoned after a mass hysteria in 1910 drove the congregation mad, their voices still echoing. Mrs. Ellen, a frail shopkeeper with trembling hands, clutched my sleeve as I bought supplies. "Don't go there at night," she whispered, her breath sour with coffee. "The hymns call the lost, and they don't release you." I smiled. Small towns in the United States are woven with ghost stories, from spectral choirs in the Carolinas to haunted missions in California. But her warning settled in my bones as I parked my van, the church's silence a heavy cloak. My first night, I entered through a sagging door, the creak of hinges echoing, the floor groaning under my boots with a sound like snapping twigs, the air thick with the smell of mildew, rotting wood, and a faint, sickly sweetness, like spoiled honey or festering wounds. The pews were splintered, the altar a heap of moldy hymnals, and the air hummed with an unnatural stillness. At midnight, eager to record ambient sounds for my project, I set up my recorder near the pulpit, adjusting the microphone. A chilling hymn erupted from the silence, a discordant melody of voices, high and low, male and female, blending into a cacophony that clawed at my ears, the pews trembling as if alive, dust swirling. A wave of icy air hit me, freezing my breath into clouds, carrying the scent of mildew and decay, so pungent it coated my tongue, and unseen touches prickled my skin, like spider legs skittering across my arms. I stumbled back, knocking over the recorder, my heart racing, and the hymn faded into a whisper, "Sing with us," lingering in the shadows. The next morning, I found scratches on my arms, faint red lines that stung, and the recording captured the hymn, its voices shifting, one muttering my name. The following day, I delved into the church's history, uncovering a brittle ledger from Father Isaac, the priest in 1910, hidden beneath a pew. He described a revival led by a charismatic singer, Miriam Holt, who claimed divine inspiration, her hymns driving the congregation into a frenzy. On August 22, 1910, during the midnight service, the hysteria peaked. 42 parishioners collapsed, their bodies rigid, their mouths frozen in song, their deaths blamed on a spiritual possession. Isaac wrote of hearing hymns after, seeing their shadows sway, and sealing the church with prayers, but the curse persisted, binding their voices. That night, I returned with a second recorder, and at midnight the hymn returned, a haunting chorus of Amazing Grace, twisted with guttural tones, followed by whispers, names, pleas, a rhythmic chant. The footage showed the pews vibrating, shadows rising, their forms indistinct, before the device failed. Over the next week, the hauntings intensified. The hymns echoed nightly at midnight, each note accompanied by an icy gust that chilled my bones and the scent of mildew and decay that made my stomach turn. The air thick with a dampness that clung to my clothes. Footsteps shuffled through the pews, soft yet deliberate, and I saw faces in the shadows, Miriam's stern gaze, a child's tearful eyes, a man with a contorted mouth, shifting with the moonlight. One night, As I adjusted my equipment, a shadow brushed my hand, its touch cold and slimy, leaving a welt that throbbed. My mind wrestled. Fear screamed to abandon this cursed place, to protect myself. But my passion for preserving music, for understanding its power, drove me to stay, to record their voices. I contacted Father Samuel, a retired priest in Portland, who rasped, "They're bound by song. Break the echo, but they'll resist." He sent a right, salt, holy water, and a tuning fork to disrupt the resonance, warning of the danger. On December 12th, alone and compelled to act, I faced the church at midnight, the air trembling with dread. I sprinkled salt around the pulpit, its grains crunching as I chanted the Latin prayer, my voice quivering, my hands clammy. The hymn swelled, a deafening chorus, the pews shaking, the spirits rising, Miriam in a tattered robe, the child with hollow cheeks, others with twisted limbs. Their hands reached, cold and slick, and Miriam's voice boomed, "Join our choir." A tendril of shadow wrapped my wrist, pulling me toward the altar, my fear surging, flee or fight. But I struck the tuning fork, its note piercing the air, the hymn faltering. I broke free, fleeing as the church shuddered, the voices dissolving into a sob. On December 19th, desperate, I gathered a team. Father Samuel, despite his cough, Jane, a music theorist with a keen ear, and Peter, a sound engineer with steady hands. We set up at midnight, candles flickering, the air tense. The hymn erupted, the spirits surging, Miriam leading, her eyes glowing, the others following, their forms solid. "You can't silence us," Miriam roared, the pews rattling. The spirits lunged, pinning Jane, her screams echoing as Peter tuned the fork, the note clashing. I doused the altar with holy water, the liquid sizzling, and Father Samuel prayed, his voice weak. The hymn broke, the spirits wailing, but Peter vanished, his equipment clattering, his shadow merging with the mist. The aftermath was a scar on my soul. Peter was gone, his family searching in vain, and Jane quit her work, her mind fractured. The church was sealed, its ruins left to fade, but the hymns linger. I moved to Washington, but the echoes haunt me at midnight. The United States is a land of history and restless spirits, and I'd stirred ones that refused to rest. The lesson burned into me. Some hymns carry more than faith, they carry damnation, and recording them can bind you to their song. Now, every night at midnight, I hear that hymn, feel that cold touch, a reminder that Miriam may still call me.
Story 5.
A dark church, when faith can't save your soul. My name is Daniel Pierce, and I've always sought solace in faith. A refuge that began with my grandmother's prayers during stormy nights in our old farmhouse. Raised in the United States, where dark churches and their shadowed histories mark the land from the humid bayous of Louisiana to the rocky cliffs of New Hampshire, I grew up in a small town near Baton Rouge. My father a minister who taught me scripture, my mother a nurse whose gentle hands eased our fears. At 39, with years of experience as a youth pastor, I took a mission to reconsecrate the abandoned dark hollow church in rural Alabama, a place rumored to be forsaken by God. But on January 14th, 2026, as I knelt to pray at midnight, a blood-curdling scream tore through the silence. The floor split open, and a wave of heat and the stench of charred flesh engulfed me, leaving my hands scorched. That moment, at the stroke of midnight on a cold winter night, dragged me into a nightmare so harrowing I wish my faith had warned me away. Dark Hollow Church, perched on a desolate ridge outside Mobile, Alabama, a decaying brick structure built in 1840. Its walls blackened, its steeple toppled, its interior a cavern of broken pews and cracked stained glass that reflected no light. The surrounding area was a lonely stretch of pine and swamp, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth, moss, and a faint, sour rot, broken by the croak of frogs and the rustle of unseen creatures. Locals shunned the church, their voices dropping to whispers, claiming it was abandoned after a ritual gone wrong in 1865 left the congregation lost, their souls trapped. Old Man Tucker, a wiry fisherman at the dock, grabbed my arm, his eyes wild. "Don't go there," he hissed, his breath reeking of fish and bourbon. "Faith won't save you. Only death waits inside." I nodded, clutching my cross. Small towns in the United States are laced with tales of cursed sanctuaries, from haunted plantations in Georgia to forsaken missions in Arizona. But his words gnawed at me as I unpacked my supplies, the church's darkness pressing against my spirit. My first night, I entered through a shattered window, the glass crunching under my boots, the floor creaking with a sound like groaning bones, the air thick with the smell of damp brick, mold, and a sharp, coppery tang, like fresh blood mixed with ash. The pews were splintered, the altar a charred ruin, and the air pulsed with an oppressive silence. At midnight, seeking to reclaim the space, I knelt to pray near the altar, my voice soft with the Lord's Prayer. A blood-curdling scream tore through the silence, a sound so raw it ripped at my eardrums, the floor splitting open with a thunderous crack, revealing a chasm below. A wave of heat surged up, searing my skin, and the stench of charred flesh, acrid, like burnt hair and roasting meat, filled my lungs, leaving my hands scorched where they touched the edge. I stumbled back, my cross slipping, and the scream faded into a low chant, "Join us," echoing from the pit. The next morning, I found blisters on my hands, raw and throbbing, and my camera captured a shadow rising from the chasm, its form twisted, its eyes glowing faintly. The following day, I researched the church's past, uncovering a singed journal from Father Josiah, the priest in 1865, hidden in the debris. He described a Confederate chaplain, Ezekiel Black, who led a secret sect, believing a ritual could summon a dark savior to win the war. On April 9, 1865, the rite failed. Ezekiel and 20 followers were consumed by fire from a pit they opened, their bodies ash, their souls bound. Josiah wrote of hearing chants, seeing shadows writhe, and sealing the chasm with prayers, but the curse endured, defying salvation. That night, I returned with a recorder, and at midnight, the scream returned, followed by a distorted hymn, deep guttural voices singing "Nearer, my God, to thee," and whispers of names. The audio showed the floor trembling, a hand clawing from the pit, its fingers blackened before the device sparked out. Over the next week, the hauntings escalated. The pit screamed nightly at midnight, each cry accompanied by a blast of heat that blistered my skin and the stench of charred flesh that made me retch. The air thick with smoke that stunned my eyes. Footsteps shuffled from below, heavy and dragging, and I saw faces in the shadows. Ezekiel's gaunt sneer, a soldier with a melted face, a woman with hollow eyes, shifting with the torchlight. One night, as I prayed, a hand broke through, its touch cold yet burning, leaving a welt on my neck. My mind battled. Fear urged me to flee, to preserve my life, but my faith, my calling to save souls, compelled me to stay, to confront this evil. I called Father Michael, a priest in Montgomery, who murmured, "It's a void of faith. Break the seal, but they'll claim you." He sent a rite, salt, holy water, and a hammer to shatter the barrier, warning of the peril. On January 21st, alone and driven by duty, I faced the chasm at midnight, the air crackling with malice. I sprinkled salt around the edge, its grains hissing on the stone, as I chanted the prayer, my voice shaking, my hands trembling. The scream grew deafening, the floor splitting wider, the spirits rising. Ezekiel in a tattered uniform, the soldier with a charred skull, others with burned flesh. Their hands reached, cold yet searing, and Ezekiel's voice boomed, "Faith failed us, join us." A tendril of shadow wrapped my leg, pulling me toward the pit, my fear surging, run or fight. But I swung the hammer, the barrier cracking. I broke free, fleeing as the church shook, the chant fading into a wail. On January 28th, desperate, I gathered a team. Father Michael, despite his frailty, Sarah, a historian with a resolute stare, and James, a carpenter with a crowbar. We set up at midnight, candles guttering, the air oppressive. The pit screamed, the spirits surging, Ezekiel leading, his eyes ablaze. The others following, their forms solid. "No redemption," Ezekiel roared, the pews rattling. The spirits lunged, pinning Sarah, her cries echoing as James pried, the stone groaning. I doused the chasm with holy water, the liquid sizzling, and Father Michael prayed, his voice breaking. The barrier shattered, the spirits wailing, but James vanished, his crowbar clattering, his shadow sinking into the dark. The aftermath was a wound on my faith. James was gone, his family searching in vain, and Sarah quit her work, her mind shattered. The chasm was sealed, the church left to decay, but the screams linger. I moved to Tennessee, but the chants haunt me at midnight. The United States is a land of history and restless spirits, and I'd stirred one's faith can't save. The lesson seared into me. Some churches harbor more than sin. They harbor damnation, and entering them can doom your soul. Now, every night at midnight, I hear that scream, feel that heat, a reminder that Ezekiel may still claim me.